Soweto Theatre will be honouring legendary playwright Dr Gibson Kente with a lecture on the 25th of February. Bob Kente is credited with prolific works like Manana, which featured celebrated musicians Caiphus, Semenya and Mbulu. The composer, director and producer also worked with the likes of Brenda Fassie, Nomsa, Nene and Mbongeni, Ngema. We take a look at this. We are joined now by theatre scholar Dr Andile Xaba. Thank you very much for your time this morning. There is a generation of South Africans who still use the words "touch my heart, feel the beat" to express love and appreciation to the next person. Maybe an introduction to who Bob Gibson Kente is for those of us who may not be familiar with him.
Well, sure. He was born in the Eastern Cape, and and then he came to Soweto. He was actually a migrant. He was a migrant to Soweto, and he first started as a social worker, and then he soon was dissatisfied with that and went to work there for Gallo Records. And while at Gallo, he wrote songs for people like Letta, Mbulu, Caiphus, Semenya, and the Manhattan Brothers. In fact, for Miriam Makeba, he wrote two songs which are very popular, Jolinkomo and Makwalandi. But, he soon left Gallo Records and went to Doke House, which in those days, was a meeting point for all the creatives. If you're black and if you're creative, you were at Doke House. And then he stayed there for a couple of years, but then he decided to start his own theatre company in Soweto, which is when the legend of Gibson Kente.
Bob Xaba, given his body of work and the work that he's done, which is still appreciated to date, this lecture, did you have to whittle down to choose specific elements? Or maybe you can just let us in on what it took to actually put this together and what people can expect.
Wow. Well, he wrote about 35 plays. And, he started in the 60s and stopped around 2003. He was in his 70s when he stopped. And, I think he was actually only stopped by ill health and death. So, one has to, first of all, the narrative, of his life has never been written. So I have attempted to reconstruct a narrative of his plays and of other Soweto Theatre playwrights, because we find that mostly with black theatre playwrights, they don't keep an archive of their work, so we normally rely on oral history to with interviewing people. And which I did do. I'm putting together a book on Soweto history, and I'm talking about Gibson Kente, but also about Manana and Maponya, and there are hosts of other township, playwrights, that were popular from the 1960s right up to the 1990s. So, in my lecture, I will really be picking up just on certain themes. He was a guy that worked with high emotion in his theatre, and in his theatre, he captured the elements of hope and despair, and these elements kind of worked together, and we see them, in his plays like How Long and most notably Sebunjalo.
Have we seen something like what he produced in recent memory? I mean, you think of the plays that he produced or even television works that made it at the time, from the way people expressed themselves, opening of the mouth, the facial expressions, the movement, the hand gestures, it was also deliberate and so impactful. People brought it. Is that something that we see as well today in this space? Or has it evolved?
I think that, he was deliberate in terms of having a Gibson Kente style. And, he wanted to do theatre in his own way. And he was interested in the urban black culture, and he wanted to convey that across, to people. And I think that there are lots of things that current playwrights do, especially in the townships, that they kind of take for granted. But they were actually really invented, by Gibson in terms of, this kind of performative style, in terms of trying to engage with your audience. He didn't believe in audiences being passive. He wanted the actors, whether they're singing or whether they're dancing, or whether they're speaking their lines, just to engage the audience. And, he dealt with comedic elements, and, his music and the plays also, had quite a lot of music and comedy, but he also dealt with pretty serious issues, for that time. But I think that, I saw some plays at the Grahamstown Festival a couple of years ago, and the children, who have never seen the Gibson Kente play, they've kind of internalized this form of theatre. So I think it is still living, although we might not call it Gibson Kente style theatre, but I think that it has been absorbed by the new generation.
When we take a look at the lecture itself, can we expect a little bit of a performance? Can we expect a little bit of singing? Or is it just going to purely be the delivering of the lecture? And how long is it? Where can people get their tickets? When is it?
Oh, I'm not. Okay, so it is this coming Sunday at, I think at 3 o'clock. So, be at the Soweto Theatre before that. The director, Mr. James, always put together a program of music and dance and some kind of reminiscence on Gibson Theatre, on Gibson Kente. I will just be doing the boring part, which is just talking about him. And but it should be, a lot of fun and educational. These events, the lecture gives us an opportunity just to acknowledge our culture, acknowledge where we come from, and also just pay tribute, to the people that have contributed so much to the cultural and social development of this country, because Gibson Kente was not only just a playwright, he involved the community in his everyday endeavor. Whether it was, through scholarships, he funded university students and scholars. And, he would donate money to schools, not only in Soweto, but in other townships as well, because, during the 80s, when schools were damaged during the uprisings, he had a program where specific shows where, he would say, okay, for this show, I'm raising funds for this school, and they would go and buy desks and, windows and fix windows and that type of thing. So he was more than just a playwright. He was just, a social activist, and, he saw the power of theatre. And, he believed in the people of Soweto, and he believed in the people of other townships that, we can have a rich cultural life, even in these desolate places, where, the apartheid government didn't invest in infrastructure. So that's his legacy.
Is there a sense of community, Xaba, in these spaces that you speak of in present-day South Africa?
I think that it's fragmented. I mean, I work, with the Soweto Theatre, and I'm hoping that we're going to have an ongoing conversation. I mean, they do have, training for theatre and music and dance, but I think that we can do a lot more, in terms of getting even theatre groups in Soweto, to speak to each other, and then theatre groups in other townships, to speak to each other, because, we need this kind of people-to-people relationship. And, this is how Gibson Kente worked. I mean, he was not a one-man show. he had, within his company, sometimes he'd have two plays showing at different townships, at the same time. And, what he had done over the years was, whenever he went into a township, he would develop a relationship with the people. And most of these people, who were sort of his backup plan, were mostly women. They were teachers and some were nurses. Somebody like Winky Direko was one of them, one of the well-known ones. Mm. So whenever he would tour, then he would, depend on those people to put the posters up, to tell people that Gibson Kente is coming. And also, most importantly, to provide accommodation for his actors. Because, if you remember in those days, there was a lot of for whites only signs. So there were limited accommodation, but also, the money, was not, they didn't make so much money that, they'd be able to stay in hotels and stuff like that. So he depended on people in the community. And I think that, that's what the theater needs, really just to bring it up to its sort of maximum.
Right. Well, Xaba, thank you so much for your contribution, and all the best with the very important work that you have embarked on, of not only documenting the stories of the most prolific that came before us, but also on the delivery of your lecture tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the Soweto Theatre, the special lecture honoring the life and times of Dr Gibson Kente.